Like my salvation journey was like a faith that was caught even before it was taught. I saw people raise their hands in worship. I'm doing it. I saw people taking notes during the sermon. I'm doing it. I was welcomed at the table, and I just started to become like these people, and they would say, you need to encounter Jesus for yourself. So I would do all the things. And I was so thankful for people who like taught me the ways of Jesus. Cause to be honest, I fell in love with the church before I fell in love with Jesus. Cause it was just like the hands and feet. And then I wanted to learn who the head was.
Can you tell us a bit about your church, where you guys are, your family? Just kind of give us a little window into your life.
Yes. So I am co-pastoring with my wife, Amritha, a church plant in the Seattle area called Kalos Church.
Whereabouts in Seattle? Are you in the suburbs of Seattle?
We're on the east side of Seattle. Okay. So, Seattle is geographically not very large. We're trapped in with the mountains and the ocean. And so we are 10 minutes away from downtown Seattle with no traffic, not very far at all. But we're on the east side. You got to go over the water to get there on a bridge.
It's so pretty there, man.
It's beautiful. Very similar as far as, the mountains and the weather as where we are right now. But Bellevue, where we planted, very, very wealthy area. When we moved there from the Midwest, the two richest people on earth lived in our city at the time, a city of 150,000 people. So Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos all had houses there.
Wow.
So very unique area, but it's also a majority minority city. So it's wealthy, but a minority wealth, brain drain transfer, people from all over the world trying to work for Amazon or Microsoft or, T-Mobile, Costco.
When did you guys move from the Midwest to Bellevue?
So we were pastoring in Michigan in the Detroit area with youth and young adults. It's in rural Detroit area. So it was a church on a dirt road in between an apple orchard and a Christmas tree farm.
Wow.
And we were the diversity of the region. And so I had a beard like down almost to my belly button. My hair was longer. And so people called me Brown Jesus as I was pastoring in that area. And so anyways, we had a dream and felt called to plant in an area called Bellevue, literally a dream in the middle of the night. And so.
And was church planting something you'd been exposed to or seen? Like, what kind of shaped that imagination even for it?
Yes. I felt a call to ministry in high school. I come from a Hindu refugee family, and it was a pretty strong conversion. I could share that in a moment if you want. But I gave my life to the Lord and felt a call to ministry. And I felt like I would be a traveling evangelist because my family didn't know the Lord. I had an encounter, and I was like, I got to tell as many people as possible about Jesus. In fact, when I became a Christian, one of the first things I did was I grabbed all the Christians in my public school, and I said, you knew the whole time about the gospel? And I was just saved enough to be like, saved, but a little bit dangerous. And I cussed them out.
No way.
In the name of Jesus. And I just said, you knew about the gospel this whole time and you didn't invite me to church one time. Did you know I tried to commit suicide 2 times? I've never been invited to church before, all of this kind of stuff. And they repented in fear and trembling, not knowing what this wild man was going to do. But I just had this burden to share the gospel. I thought I would be a traveling evangelist. I went to a Bible school, and then during that time, I felt like the Lord was challenging. Hey, maybe instead of speaking to stadiums, I think the best evangelism you could do is maybe plant a seed of a local church and foster that kind of multi-generational mindset of like staying and growing and seeing what the Lord could do through the local church. And so I felt this burden to church plant, be sent by a church in some sort of apostolic ministry to an unchurched area. And though I wrote my senior paper about that, felt a burden for church planting, but I felt like the Lord would speak to me, hey, before you ask people to serve some sort of ministry you lead, why don't you spend some time leading in someone else's ministry? Just serve. And so I did that for 10 years, served in various capacities until we were sent to plant our own church.
Wow. And how's it going?
It's going great. I mean,
what year did you guys start again?
2017.
Okay.
So we are
just a little pandemic hidden in there.
Yes. I know. It's like, how old are you? I feel like we've planted 2 churches.
Yeah.
I said, we will call ourselves a church plant for the first 5 years, but I feel like the pandemic reset that number.
Yeah.
So It's going well. I mean, I love church planting. What an adventure, but it exposes you to the highs and the lows of following the Lord and what adventure means. I mean, literally had a dream in the middle of the night, planted in a place called Bellevue, woke my wife up and said, "Hey, do you think this is the Lord?" She said, "Well, let's do something really spiritual. Let's Google map Bellevue," because we had no idea where it was. My wife's from Kansas. I was born and raised in Minnesota. We were living in Detroit. So we knew that, like the middle America part. And so we Google map Bellevue. Lo and behold, it's outside of Seattle. It's way more expensive. We don't know anybody there. Like in Detroit, we were looking at a house to buy for $6,000 US. It was crazy. Now, like the average house in Seattle area is $1 million US. So the sticker shock, the craziness, not knowing people, we moved out there and our first meeting was literally 3 people. So it was an actual parachute plant.
Yeah.
You know, people are like, "Where do you meet?" We don't have a building. We have a website. We don't know anybody. We're just trying to meet anybody however we can.
Yeah.
And so we would like go to the park and let our kid get lost there. And when someone would return him back to us, we would say, "Thank you."
Yeah.
Can
do
we?
Do you know the Lord?
Yes. Thank you. Would you like to repent?
That's so good.
Let us repay you over coffee. And then
Yeah.
they'd ask, "Why are you here?" And we'd share about the church, and we do surveys in the mall. So awkward. What kind of church would you go if you ever went to a church?
You guys did the hustle. You said we're gonna just one at a time meet people, and obviously the church is in a very different stage right now.
Yes.
And you guys have a beautiful church, and it's not a church that you could peg into one category. It's wildly diverse.
Yes.
It's passionate. There's an enthusiasm, but there's also some depth, and you guys are doing creative things that feel to me like intentional discipleship, and without losing that ounce of missional passion. And it's a bummer when I feel like sometimes those things I think in a biblical sense, they cannot be pitted against each other. They're like part and parcel. But somehow in the dialogue it feels, or in our imagination about what a local church can be, it feels like at times am I picking one over the other? And I think that you guys represent an environment that's saying, no, we can have really wide open doors and really deep roots.
Amen. I know that divide between discipleship and evangelism, it doesn't make sense because I mean, the fruit of discipleship is evangelism.
Yeah.
And if you evangelize enough people and lead them to Christ, they're going to ask questions.
Yeah.
And that's going to lead you back to discipleship. I feel like people make you, choose a camp, or they disguise it in words of, "Pastor, I wish we were going deeper."
Yeah.
And I try not to get passive aggressive when I hear that word.
Yeah.
But they're friends. They work together.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to hear your family story. You mentioned you're part of a refugee family.
Yes.
And how old were you when your family landed in the States?
So I was the only person in my family ever born in America.
Okay, so you were born there.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your story, and I'm very interested to hear how Jesus found his way into your family.
So my family comes from Sri Lanka, and they lived through a massive civil war where it was devastating. People are around them in real time. Very dangerous, very traumatic, very scary. And thankfully, they were able to escape from immediate danger and then have the opportunity to immigrate to the United States as refugees.
So brave. Obviously when there's fear propelling you, but just that to end up in a new community without all of your relationships,
yes,
connections, not to mention processing all the trauma and pain of,
right.
It blows my mind. And tell me more.
Yeah. Any parent that sees their kids in danger is going to do whatever it takes to protect them.
Yeah.
And so I think we kind of diminish refugees in the narrative today, but any of us, if we're trying to figure out a future for our kids or how can they survive, we would do whatever it takes. And so my parents did that, and they traveled as immigrants from tropical island Sri Lankan paradise, but in the midst of war, and ended up in Minnesota in the wintertime. And so, very different reality, a whole new world. And they were practicing Hindus at the time, but couldn't find a Hindu temple in Minnesota, in the 80s, early 80s.
Yeah.
Had to learn a new language. And, my dad had an incredible job. Like, he was a superintendent for a whole tea plantation. 5,000 people were under him. And he had to start over in America, go through a community college, all that kind of stuff. And so it was a crazy reality. And my sister was like 4 years old at the time. And anyways, they decided this new start wasn't worth it, mixing with the trauma of war and just processing all of that. So they decided as a family, they're going to end their lives by jumping off of a bridge. So they went to a bridge, and I mean, can you imagine that? My mom, my dad, my sister, we're going to just end it. A fresh start. The American dream is a nightmare for us. We do not know how to start over. We don't have the capacity to figure this out on our own. So they were going to a bridge, and while they were going to go forth with that plan, actually a Lutheran pastor saw them, and instead of just walking by, he took time to meddle and interfere and
Did he have
insert
a sense
himself.
that, like, was it visibly obvious to him that they might be?
He said, "I just saw your dad so distraught.
Whoa.
I knew I couldn't just walk by. I had to sit with him." So he approached my dad and said, "Hey, I'm not exactly sure why you're doing what it looks like you're going to do, but why don't you and your whole family come live with me, my wife, our kids, and our trailer home?" And so this pastor took in my family. It's a strange brown family into this Norwegian, Minnesotan Lutheran pastor trailer home. And so my family went in with them, and he and his wife shared the gospel with my family and Christian hospitality. And over that time, they no longer felt pessimism about their future.
Wow.
In fact, they decided to get pregnant with me in that trailer home. And I'm so thankful for that family that took us in, and they said, this is what Christianity looks like. It's not just preaching sermons. It's not just like leading an organization or, thinking about systems and funnels. It's like doing for one person what you wish you could do for everybody.
Yeah.
Like being in people's lives, praying for them, doing the ministry, being interrupted in your precise schedule. And like literally, I'm only alive today because a pastor took the time to see a stranger and let them like inconvenience them.
Have you ever got to meet this guy?
Yes, I have. Their whole family. I'm very close with his sons to this day.
That's incredible.
How
long did your parents live with them?
So they lived with him about a year.
No
and
way.
Through the church, they helped him get an apartment and actually a parsonage on the church property. So actually, when I was born, my earliest memories were literally living in a Lutheran church building, running around the pews, interrupting programs. Like that was my first.
And so did your family get caught up in the life of the church then pretty quickly? Or like, I'm trying to think about that journey for them, practicing Hindus without house of worship to go to, now brought into the home of a Christian pastor, and then so proximate even to the church building. Who was the first person in your family to become a Christian?
So my family got involved with the life of the church, went to services, were in the phone directories when families took pictures and listed their phone numbers for the whole church, the whole thing. But as they moved forward with the American dream, where they got their own house and jobs, they actually like stopped going to church entirely as they moved away, got their own house, got caught up in working. And so I hear these stories about my family involved with the church, like my dad leading Bible studies or even writing worship songs. But then as I became a child and then like a teenager, I didn't actually know the church life myself at all. I didn't know the gospel myself at all. I just knew that the church had done something really helpful for our family. Yeah. And then now I knew just like normal secular life without a church involved at all. Just kind of wild to think about.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And so then you mentioned in high school, you became a Jesus follower? What were the series of events that led up to that?
Yeah. So my family, as they got their own house and got cars and stopped going to church, they kind of felt like they could live on their own, and it didn't work. They ended up divorcing, and my mom went through a period of homelessness, living out of her
so
car.
sorry, man.
And my dad moved away from us, and my sister was off at college. And so I was basically living in a house, pretty much alone as my mom was in and out as it was getting foreclosed on. And so I was looking for a family wherever I could find it, and ended up making friends who were into selling drugs and just stealing. And so I actually got arrested at one point for breaking and entering, stealing. Then my dad realized this is like not great. And so had me move in with him and kind of have a fresh start. But it was really, really a dark period of my life. I remember being so distraught as a young man. As I left the house, I took a sledgehammer and destroyed all the walls and spray painted the house that my family had built from the ground up.
Wow.
Just, really, really angry, really angry. And so I moved to this new city in Minnesota and kind of falling into the same friend group a little bit. But then there's this girl, Amy DeVanzo, who actually invited me to go to church with her. And now I was a pretty awkward kid. I was never fully Sri Lankan, never fully American, didn't understood the culture on both sides very well. I was kind of this third culture kid. And so I didn't really have a lot of friends my own age. And a lot of beautiful girls were not talking to me. Like, I think at age 11, I had a mustache, but it wasn't made out of hair. It was made out of chapped lips. So I was that kid, very, very awkward. And so this beautiful girl invites me into church. And I say, I'll go anywhere with you. This is a first for me. So she invites me to this youth church, and all these beautiful girls greet me at the door, and they say, "We're so glad you're here." And I'm like, "What? What is this place? This is incredible. I love church." Like immediately, I love church. So I go there, and it's like, it's like late 90s ska worship, and it's goofy and it's wild. It was an era of like Christian culture where the weirder you were, the cooler you were. So I was like king. Yeah. And I loved it.
Yeah, I like that.
My people. And so I ended up doing everything I could with these Christians because I was just so hungry for a family and community. So like even before I gave my life to the Lord, I started drumming on the worship team. Before I gave my life to the Lord, they would say, "Hey, let's go street witnessing." I say, "Okay, I just want to hang out with you." And so I led 6 people to the Lord before I became a Christian myself.
No way.
Like my salvation journey was like a faith that was caught even before I was taught. I saw people raise their hands in worship. I'm doing it. I saw people taking notes during the sermon. I'm doing it. I was welcomed at the table, and I just started to become like these people. And they would say, "You need to encounter Jesus for yourself." So I would do all the things. And I was so thankful for people who like taught me the ways of Jesus. Cause to be honest, I fell in love with the church before I fell in love with Jesus. Cause it was just like the hands and feet. And then I wanted to learn who the head was, like who are the people designing this thing. And I fell in love with Jesus through that. And
it's really precious to hear that. There's the dominant narrative is I fell in love with Jesus despite or in spite of the church.
Yes.
And I get that. I get that. But it is really special when the church is that foretaste, that witness to the better thing.
Yes.
And how much of this, finish, keep going, because there's more to the story probably.
About my salvation story?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm doing everything with these people, and then I'm like lacking family. So I remember going up to the youth pastor in my summer breaks, and I say, "Can I just spend all day with you?" And so I would be at the church building from, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., asking questions, learning, praying with people, asking the weirdest questions like, should I pray for the devil? Because we're supposed to pray for our enemies. Like, what does that look like? Where can I process all these things? And they just were so patient with me. And this was like a country singing church, like steel guitars, cowboy hats, and a Sri Lankan young boy hanging out, asking all the questions, learning all the things. And so I fell in love with that. I ended up starting a personal relationship with Jesus. I didn't have like a, raise your hand salvation moment. For me, it was like falling in love with a person. Like, when do you fall in love with a spouse? Or for me, I kind of equate it to, not to be crude, but it was kind of like being potty trained. It's like, I can't tell you the time and date I was potty trained, but with like 99% certainty, I can tell you I'm potty trained.
Yeah.
And so it happened over a series of events.
That's beautiful. Not the analogy, but the story.
Yeah.
I guess one of the questions I'd love to just dive into, and it's probably a bit of a too big of a question, but how is your story shaped the church you're leading? Your story of your family, story of mental health, story of welcome, finding a home, the hospitality of that. Like, as youth now are creating and leading a community, how is your own story deeply forming the kind of community you and Amritha are leading together?
We share our story as much as possible. I mean, it can be repetitive, but I only have one life. I only have one story. And, I really do believe like we as a people overcome by the blood of the Lamb, but the word of our testimony, and not loving our lives, even if it means we die, just self-sacrifice. I think that combination of things is really just a wonderful tool for any church plant. Trust in the blood of Jesus. Like, you don't have to compromise. You don't have to water it down. Like, trust that Jesus is going to do the heavy lifting of building the church. Give yourself to it. Don't have a hireling mentality. Like, I'm not going to run when things get hard. I'm laying my life down for the sheep, But then tell your story, the good, the bad. It's not a bad testimony if you've loved the Lord your whole life. I pray my kids have that testimony. Share your story. And so from the beginning, I shared about my family, a refugee family. My wife, she was born in India and abandoned on the first moment of her life into a nurse's arms. And this nurse had no intention of starting an orphanage, but she said, what do I do with this child? The umbilical cord is still there. She's still wet, and ended up taking in 100 kids, not as a pastor, just a nurse working her job. And anyways, so my sister, my wife, my sister, my spouse, if I'm quoting the Song of Solomon. Anyways, my wife, Amritha, she was placed for adoption in Middle America, Kansas, and was raised by a charismatic Amish and Mennonite family.
Come on.
With cows and not a single stoplight in her entire city as this brown girl, And so when we share that story, though, hey, this is our story. This is why we're starting it, because we freely receive the benefit of the gospel. And we feel a burden to share that with as many people as possible and create more stories like ours, like the pastor who invited us into the house, like a family that invited my wife into a house. We want to do the same thing. And as we've shared that story, living in a majority minority city, people are, wow, as an immigrant, as someone who's just moved here, who's cut off from my family, who is feeling the trauma of a fresh start, thank you for being vulnerable and giving me permission to also be vulnerable. Because I know as pastors, it's one thing to, be transparent. Like, we can kind of use transparency as like almost a gimmick or a tool to compel people. But, transparency, I would say it like this, is like you can kind of see my pain, but vulnerability says you can be my pain. You're like part of my ongoing story. And so as we've shared our story, it's opened up people to say, like, we're going to be vulnerable with you. Like, we're going to invite you into the most tender parts of our lives and our hearts. And they found a safe place in the church. Now, like in the American church, the Sunday morning gathering is not typically very diverse. Like Martin Luther King called it the most segregated hour in America, which is really sad because like if you go to most major cities in the world this day, if you go to the local coffee shop, it's going to be diverse.
Yeah.
But then you go to a church and it's not diverse. It's segregated by wealth or by skin color. And so just sharing, like, we're all foreigners. We all have an immigrant story like ours. And so let's come to the table that Jesus is building for all people. It's created a crazy diverse church. This is the most diverse church that I've ever been a part of. But I really believe, like, if you lift up the name of Jesus, he's going to draw all nations. But if you lift up maybe political parties or different things that are more the culture of your nation rather than the culture of the kingdom, I think that feeds things being more homogenous than diverse. But when you say this is a place to encounter Jesus as he is, without the filters that we are intentionally creating that are by a political party or a national brand, I think you're naturally going to attract all nations. This is what Jesus said. So we just leaned into our story and people shared their stories and it created a landing spot.
Wow. I want to hear more about your church. Like, just give us a window into the last couple of years, like coming out of the pandemic. Give us some of the plot points. I just wanted to learn more.
Yeah, so we planted in 2017. We moved there. Remember, 3 people at our first meeting, 5 people at our second meeting. This was a shock because we were youth and young adult pastors in the Midwest, in Detroit area. And our big gatherings are like 1,200 students.
Wow.
In a city without a public school.
Yeah.
And so in a church on a dirt road. And so we would just send buses out, gather people. This was before social media, all of that, word of mouth, gather people. And so we're trying to do some of the same things in Seattle, which is the most unchurched large city in America.
What a cultural shift, hey?
Yeah.
Just in terms of people's relationship to the church. How did you process? Like, obviously, you know, you're both so thoughtful. You're aware of it. It's one thing to know it in theory.
Yeah.
What was that feeling like going, okay, this is different?
It was wild. I mean, especially when we were trying to do some interest parties. Hey, we're interested in starting a church. Anybody want to be a part of this? We thought we'd run the playbook from the Midwest America, and it just did not work. The same thing that gathered 1,200 students gathered 3 people in Seattle.
Wow.
You know, the same amount of money, time, effort. And we were like, my goodness, this is not great. So we had a playbook for church planting. And so we realized we couldn't run the playbook. You know, the same strategies that worked in maybe the southern states of America or in Bible Belt areas like the Midwest just were not working in Seattle. And so we made some adjustments. And so we had revival at our second meeting. 5 people showed up.
Come on, almost 100%.
That's right.
Doubled.
It was wild. And we're like, this is not working. And so instead of doing like very polished ministry, slick and all the marketing, we decided to just start doing last minute barbecues in our backyard that looked a little sketchy, but felt very authentic.
Yeah.
And 65 people came to that.
Wow.
You know, just going on Facebook and Nextdoor and LinkedIn and saying, we're throwing a backyard barbecue in our house. Come to this strange place. And they did. So we just said, hey, this is why we're here. We're trying to start a church. If you're interested, would you help us? And 34 people from that group said, we'll help you.
And some of these probably not church folk.
No, some didn't. They were just lonely, looking for something to do. Assumed I was Hindu, kind of secretly believed I was Hindu. They were like, let's go. And so we were looking for venues, learning with this team on what does it look like to start a church, teaching people how to play instruments, drive a truck for a portable church setup. We didn't have a venue. It's so expensive there, you know, and I remember we were just looking for venues. One day I was at a comedy club at like 9 a.m. and I knocked on the door and someone actually opened up the door, which was crazy because it was so early. But as we were walking around, I felt like the Holy Spirit literally whispered to me, knock on that door. So I knocked on it. This girl answers it. I said, we're trying to start a church. And she says, my dad was a youth pastor. I haven't gone to church in like 10 years, but actually I'm going to make this work for you. Premier spot, downtown Bellevue, for so cheap, like
awesome.
$400 a month in the premier location with the sound system, all the videos.
Is that where you're still meeting today?
No.
Okay.
But we launched September 17, 2017 in that comedy club. No joke.
Wow.
And we had like 234 people come, which was like revival in Seattle.
Yeah.
And then we launched a second service, hit like 500 people for the first time a year later. And then the pandemic hit. And so we had gathered this church, stories like my family, diverse crew. And then we were online for 58 weeks. And our first service back was 38 people. And so it was just brutal.
And what's going on for you at that point? Like, I know we can say it's not about the numbers, but it's like, that's devastating. These are real people. It's a completely different church. And it's like, you probably feel abandoned in some ways. You feel like, did I fail? Like, what kind of stuff were you experiencing in that? I mean, it's probably throughout the whole of that journey, but you're coming back. Yeah. Would love to hear what was happening within you.
It was the hardest time of my life. I had a lot building up to a mental breakdown, a spiritual breakdown during that time. Church planning is really, really difficult and fun and an adventure. But I had a lot of people telling me, hey, when you church plant, get ready for spiritual warfare. I was like, yeah, I've been in ministry before. I mean, you kind of understand that there are going to be attacks and different realities you face. But in the first year of church planting, leading up to the pandemic even, my wife's father suddenly passed away, unexpected, like no lead up to it. Then my stepdad passed away, and he was pastoring in California and just passed away. Then my sister, who was living in India at the time, got dengue fever and went blind for a season.
Oh man!
Multiple divorces in my immediate family,
and then that pain starts stacking too.
Yes,
grief on grief.
Yeah. And then my son, who is 2 years old, typically developing, was speaking 50 words, making eye contact, walking, playing catch with me. He got diagnosed with regressive autism and lost his ability to make eye contact, lost his ability to speak, walk, play catch. And it was like, I had one son and now I had to learn a completely different son. All the interactions, all the things we had in common before were lost. Yeah. So it was like, who is this new child? And so that was on top of all of these things while moving to a new city, while church planting. And so I was kind of coping, getting by. But then, in the pandemic, I love the church. The church is such a support system. And now we're all scattered. We're not meeting in person. We're not singing together. It was disastrous for my soul. While trying to raise a kid with special needs who, Zoom meetings don't work for a kid with special needs like mine. He's not going to pay attention. He needs physical interaction. He needs to be played with and tossed around. And so the therapy just wasn't working online. And so the rock bottom point for me was in that time, the church is scattered. My daughter, she gets a diagnosis as well. And she's only 16 months old. And we're like, my goodness, because daughters don't get diagnosed with autism as much. So we thought we're in the clear, but the thing came back. And so we're thinking, how are we going to do this? And now all of my dreams of, having this kind of relationship with my kids, these kind of conversations. Now I'm like, I don't even know if I'm going to talk to my kid. Sometimes we think of autism as just this quirky personality thing. For us, it was dangerous in our house. As our son got older, he was getting stronger. It was dangerous for us, for our daughter, as he got more aggressive and couldn't express himself. And so I was just like, how am I going to move forward? Should we just give up on the church? And so I literally hit a breaking point where I told my wife, I don't even know if I can be your husband anymore. I don't know if I have the strength to be a father anymore. I definitely can't be a pastor. Talked to the board, and they just heard me weep to them, cry to them. I'm theologically talking with every person I can. I was like, why would God allow this? What do we do with this? What does salvation mean for someone who can't confess Jesus as Lord? Just everything. Yeah. Lord, I've said yes to the calling, and this is the reward I get. As I'm using my time to build your spiritual family, my personal family is paying the cost for all of this. What is all of this? Yeah. And so I just destroy all security as a dad, as a husband, just I'm not the strong support system. Everything is dismantled in my life. I'm not a strong pillar to anybody right now. And so the board just said, hey, we still believe you two are called to co-pastor this church. But like, let's get you some vacations. Let's get you some spirit-filled counseling, professional counseling, but with people we trust. And so we just began a journey of rebuilding. And, I'm still in therapy to this day, every other week. Same with my wife. But for about 3 years, my wife and I were in marriage counseling and individual counseling every week. Just crying, lamenting, learning the prayer language of pain, learning that the American dream maybe isn't the kingdom dream, and, leaning onto the Beatitudes. If blessed are the poor and the meek, maybe my son is actually more blessed than I am. Just having a total renewal of my theology and understanding of what it means to be a kingdom person. But it was brutal.
Yeah.
It was brutal.
I'm grateful that you would share all that with us.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry.
Yeah. It was crazy. I wouldn't have gone into the other side of like out of the shock without my wife, who was a pillar of strength as I was just, falling apart. Our church, I got to be a part of the church. I didn't just lead the church. I realized like every pastor is an interim pastor. We're all temporary. And so for a season, my church congregation, they were able to be maybe like wool that I got to rest on. Just a soft place of warmth and comfort. Yeah. My team prayed for me and my wife, and our board and various pastors around us bought us vacations, and guests spoke for us in crunches when I just couldn't. And I'm really, really thankful that I'm not the only one that's responsible for the church. Yeah. Jesus does the heavy lifting, but sheep are part of the church, and they want to bring comfort. They want to bring strength and help. And, other churches are not competition. They want to see you thrive, Wow. And I'm so glad I just got to be part of an ecosystem of kingdom people that got me through that time.
That's really special. And a few years later, you're still doing it.
Yeah.
You're still in the game.
Yeah. I love church planting, and honestly, even through that time of trial, and I'm not saying I'm completely done with it. Yeah, I'm still leading with a limp. I'm still somewhat of a wounded healer, but I love the church in that moment. I was so excited when we could gather in person again. Because remember, it's been a support system through my entire life. And even for my wife and I, as we co-preached and co-led, the church was kind of like a safe spot for us, which is kind of weird to say in the pandemic because it's usually people's most painful time. But compared to everything we're going through in our family, maybe there's more control in church life, or there's more like I could interact with people who could encourage me. But it became something we really were drawn to and longed for and looked forward to and felt like we were making a difference in. And so like on the other side of the pandemic, we leaned into that. So our first meeting was like 38 people. It was in a hotel, still portable. People had to sign in by law, which was great for collecting people's contact information, 100% rate of connect cards, all of that kind of stuff. But things began to grow again, and, mass and awkwardness, all of that. But we navigated it, and we had our first Easter back, and we had over 400 people come. Like we went from 30s to 400 people came back. And, here's the crazy thing. We had 38 people back at our first service. And at that Easter Sunday, we had 38 people make a decision to follow Jesus, which is just redemptive. It felt like, you know what? Ministry will always be there. You don't have to worry about it. Like, this is God's agenda. Like, if you've read the end of the book, you realize the church isn't going to die. Like, it's going to last. It's going to endure. And so I love being part of the church. I'm grateful for the privilege of being part of the church, but I also know it will last without me, And so my family has continued to serve in the church and build in the church. And even our son is a huge part of how our church is operated now.
How old is Obi now?
He's 9 years old.
Yeah.
He has inspired a whole special needs program in our church where,
Can you tell us a bit about that?
yeah, any kid with special needs can get a one-on-one buddy throughout services. So if they are a little bit more aggressive or they can't sit with the rest of the kids, they can get a one-on-one buddy and go into a space that's free of all the stimulation that may overwhelm them. And this wasn't even something that we led. People in our church were inspired by Obi and said, wow, there's so many special needs families that feel like they can't come to a stimulating church environment because of their kids. And these families, we realize there's a whole bunch of people who want to come to church but are afraid to because they feel like the church wouldn't want us. We'd be a distraction. We'd be more expensive to steward in the kids ministry. It's not the best bang for our buck. But people in our church said, no, like this is what the church is all about. Like we judge ourselves on how we treat the least of these. That's the true test of any society or a church. What do we do with the people who nobody wants? And but the secret of church is when you reach the people nobody wants, you attract the people everybody wants because they want to be part of something where their money and their time and their effort means something. It's not just taking care of themselves. And so our son has inspired a lot of different ministries in our church, and our daughter has actually lost her autism diagnosis.
Wow.
And she's like a social butterfly and just a miracle there while stewarding a miracle in process with her son, living in that tension of, the responsibility of humans, the sovereignty of God, and living in a broken world and all the mystery and confusion that does for our theology as we pray for someone here, they get healed, pray for someone here, they don't.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it in real time. But it's unlocked a beauty and a depth in our church that, that quote, beautiful people don't happen by accident. They usually have gone through some sort of pain or suffering.
Yeah. Isn't that an interesting one as a pastor? Like I've had conversations and I would rarely say it, if ever, but I'll think it. Someone's like thinking about their future or them becoming, I'm like, oh, part of the way, like pain and suffering is part of the journey. And you're thinking, okay, like even young ministers, like Bible call it, like, how do you become a great preacher? It's like, you study the Bible and get some reps, but also move through life and keep your heart tender. Yes. And as you experience suffering in your own life and around you, it will make you a good minister. Yes. It will make you more beautiful by the grace of God. But that's like, I hate that about this side of the new heavens and new earth. Yeah. Like give me the type of growth and maturity and stuff that's going to happen in the new creation where there isn't all this pain and suffering.
Yes.
But he does really use it. And it's a strange thing as a pastor to look before people who you're wanting to shepherd into a deep life with God. And you don't become deep without navigating tough waters.
Yes.
And I realize I have this proclivity inside of me to want to just fix and protect everything. And that some of that instinct is actually just, it's not my job to somehow point people towards Jesus and minister in such a way that people are caught up in the whole story of God from creation to new creation.
Yes.
And somehow by finding their place in that story, there's hope to endure and the possibility of becoming more beautiful through it.
That's right.
I'm really enjoying this time. I'm really grateful for your story. There's lots we could chat about. There's one fun thing that, maybe fun's not the right word, interesting thing you guys are doing as a church that I wanted to mention. And it came out of some of your journey with Obi.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about what you learned about discipleship through the support Obi was getting in his life.
So Obi in public schools was given what's called an IEP, an individualized educational plan. And so they realize kids with special needs have all sorts of different needs and strengths and weaknesses, all of that, like any normal human. And so they sit down with parents at the beginning of the year and say, these are our goals for your kid. What are your goals for your kid? So I'm saying, I want him to be able to say dad, or I want to play catch with him, or I want him to, not run into the street. What are our goals? And so we combine forces and we make a plan. And they say, all right, we're going to do these things, so many hours, so many tests a week. We're going to help him learn how to say his name. We're going to teach him 5 times, give him 5 opportunities to say it, and then we're going to measure all of that.
Wow.
How's he doing? And so they're tracking it day by day, week by week, month by month to see how is he maturing as a student. And then like 4 months, later, we get together and we say, all right, here are the results. What's happening at home? What's happening in the classroom? And we have data for all of this. How many attempts? What were the results? All right, we've mastered this. He's saying his name. And so let's set a new goal. Or he hasn't mastered this. All right, let's try it until we get it right. So where's the progress? What's been accomplished? What are the weaknesses? What is some adjustment we need to consider as we go into the next semester of school? And it was really helpful because as a parent, I've never raised a kid with special needs before. I needed help. I needed experts. I didn't want it to be organic. I didn't want to figure it out on my own. I didn't want to have to, be creative. I wanted to know what has worked with other kids. What is the advice of ages past so I don't have to reinvent the wheel and have my kid be a guinea pig? And then as we were talking about this, we just said, wow, the school system is really intentional about raising our kid into a mature student and adult. But I'm a pastor and I'm trying to help people grow and be conformed to grow into the image of Jesus Christ. And I'm not being that intentional as a pastor. Like if we did the method for my son, like we're going to preach a sermon and just hope he begins to say his name, or put him in a small group and hope he says his name without any measurement or progress or follow-up, there's no way that would work. But we assume that's going to work. And I'm all about preaching and, the corporate gathering of the church. And I realize this is individual treatment, but it's done in the context of a classroom with other students. And so as I thought about this and prayed with my wife about this, we were reminded of the proverb that says, know the condition of your flocks. And I feel like the school knows the condition of my son, and that means everything to me as a father. And if our Heavenly Father wants us to feed the sheep, we need to know if they're hungry or if they're overfed. We need to know the condition of our flocks. So we started doing something we were calling the Kalos Discipleship pathway that brings our congregation into a spiritual assessment twice a year, where we just want to know what's the condition of your soul? Like, how are you doing? And we go through, spiritual practices, and they can kind of rank themselves on if they're doing them, if they understand them, how confident are they in praying or reading the Bible. We're not just assuming they know how to pray or say their name like my son. How confident are you in praying? What does it look like for you to pray? And then they can just kind of tell us. And what are the struggles you're dealing with? What's keeping you from taking your next step in your faith? Or what are you celebrating in your spiritual journey? How are you maturing into the image of Jesus Christ? And so we get all of these surveys. So we get hundreds of them. And then we have a pastoral team that reads every single one of them. And we pray about them and we give them some feedback. Like, hey, I noticed some of your open forum answers are disconnected from maybe your spiritual disciplines. Let's help you learn how to read the Bible, or let's help you learn how to pray, or you say you're really lonely. Let's help you get into a small group, or, hey, you've been at a 4 in your prayer life, and you haven't seen that move at all. Here's some resources. Here's some guides we can help you. And so, that's awesome where we can give them real data-informed information. So we're data-driven, but spirit obedient, We're getting data in real time for their discipleship process. But as a pastor, this has informed how we meet with people. This informs what we preach about. Yeah. Nobody knows how to read the Bible. We need to get some biblical literacy, And so it's helped us know the condition of our flock. I would say that's 50% of the power. The other half is people feel like they have a pastor that knows what they're going through. I don't know if you've ever had meetings with people and they're just like, I just want to be with you. Yeah. And they just kind of not looking for advice. And sometimes you're like, they need to hear my advice, but literally they just want to pour out their soul to a pastor. They just want to confess to someone and say, I exist. this person knows what I'm dealing with. There's a power. And now we realize, like, we can't do that for everybody over coffee. As our church has grown to a certain size, that would be impossible. And we can develop a team, though, who is saying, hey, every person in our church can confess their soul and what they're dealing to a pastor. You're going to be seen and known, and you're going to get feedback, but you're not alone on your spiritual journey. Like, you're not having to figure this out on your own. Just like with me and my son, there's templates. There are people that can nudge you in the right direction. You have your goals, but we have goals for you too. And now we can combine forces to help you be conformed into the image of Jesus. And it's been incredible. I feel like we know our church better. People feel known better, and it's becoming a talking point in our church. Oh yeah, I'm still a 3. And it's all self-ranked. We're not trying to create Pharisees or a religious spirit, but we're saying, hey, we measure what matters in our life. And so let's measure these things and not just hope it works out.
I love the idea itself, and I love even more the spirit of the idea, in the sense that it's like, how intentional can we be to help people? I love the language used, like, what tried and true practices are there? How do we seek more integration? How do we identify where we're at?
Yes.
And there's so much of the Christian faith that's such a mystery. The way the Spirit works, the way we're shaped by circumstances, like we were just talking about. But there is this, maybe we've over-adopted this mentality that's like, we just preach and hope for the best.
Yes.
And you said earlier this idea, forgive me if I'm quoting it wrong, like, how can we do for one or a few what we wish we could do for many?
Yeah.
I love that when I hear it, I go, okay, this is like real work. And maybe not everyone opts into it at the same level, but it's like, well, let's do for a few. Let's do for the willing. Let's invite everyone, but let's do for a few what could actually help. And the ripple out effect of that is just so profound.
Yes.
Man, it's such a joy to spend time with you. I feel very like honored to know your story more deeply. I'm just struck by God's goodness, but also I'm struck by the amount of pain you have experienced, and that you've somehow remained joyful, contagiously joyful, and so just honor you and your and the work of the Spirit in your life, and I'm sure everyone listening is just really, really grateful. So thank you, man.